Howdy y'all, welcome back. Thank you for being here. Today, we have an incredible video. We're going to be tying together so many different ancient concepts that I'm honestly really looking forward to where our discussion goes after this video. With the upcoming Winter Olympic Games, many may wonder about the origin of the Olympics. But what if I were to tell you that not only do the Olympic Games appear to tie back to ancient Africa, but what if I told you that certain scholars nowadays are beginning to make the argument that the earliest version of the African Games actually demonstrated evidence that all Hellenistic culture evolved from Northern Africa, making ancient Greek culture one that is actually derived from mainland Africa. And further, what if I explained to you that at the center of these arguments for the African origin of Greece lies the seven sages of Greece, with the most controversial of these figures also being the one who is credited with introducing monumental architecture and earthworks into Greece from his trade capital in Corinth. Before we roll deeper into these theories, first we're going to be looking at the oldest photographs of Greece throughout this video. I found those for you, I've labeled them, I've translated the titles, but also we're going to be talking about some locations in modern day Tunisia, and we're also going to be discussing ancient Libyan history. It's worth note that modern day Tunisia is a more modern creation, but all of this landscape was once encompassed within the area that was considered to be Libya. Libya was the ancient title for most of this landscape, and within the ancient Libyan borders, it was theorized there once existed a massive freshwater lake. And this lake is what we're going to be getting into today, because in modern times, historians, scholars, there's a lot of proposals, but there's no real evidence for a lake the size of the one that's described on ancient maps and in ancient texts and things like that. This lake was said to be absolutely massive, but besides that, it played a key role, if not the most crucial role, in the founding of ancient Greek history, as we're told that the goddess Athena was actually born at this freshwater oasis in northern Africa, where she learned the customs of the area, meaning either Egyptian or Semitic, Canaanite, whatever it may have been. And these formed into the earliest Hellenistic belief system. So that's something we're going to be diving into today, especially looking at the lake or the lack of evidence of this lake, which led me to something rather fascinating, known as the Chott el Djerid, which is a massive saltwater basin in the exact area where this lake should have been if it did exist. And this saltwater basin could have been the oasis where the goddess Athena was born. It's really desolate. You can see all of the emptiness. It's barren. It's a desert. It is just like the Sahara. But one thing is different. The sand is pink, and all of the water, the minimal water, is all salty as can be. How could something like that have happened in an area like this? We'll look at the possibilities of cataclysms. We'll look at some of the earliest Greek history that ties this location to other locations in Greece, seemingly making a unbreakable connection between Greek history and African history. And all of this will be accompanied by the greatest photographs of the oldest architecture in Greece. Today, we're going to attempt to break the current narrative apart, making ties between ancient civilizations, massive achievements in architecture, and myth and legend to hopefully begin to paint the picture of a history that is far different than our preconceived notions or what we may have been taught in school. First and foremost, the origin of the name Olympics, or Olympus, as in Mount Olympus, is relatively unknown. That should be our first giveaway that something is afoot in the accepted history. Interestingly, ancient scholars like Hesiod argued that Olympus meant something like pure foot, with Mount Olympus being the springboard for the gods to enter into the heavens. Others have taken it more literally and argued that Mount Olympus is the petrified remains, possibly the foot of a giant godlike being. Still, by the time of Homer, the word Olympus had become synonymous with the word sky. However, it's also worth note that Homer describes Mount Olympus as previously being called Mount Belus. As you may be familiar with, many ancient names incorporate the word Bel, which is the name of the primary pagan god of the Babylonians. This next aspect then becomes truly fascinating, as we're told according to Greek mythology, Belus was the legendary hero king of Egypt, the son of Father Poseidon, the water god, but whom many may also see as a metaphor for trade, for seafaring travel, and to his mother, Libya. How does Libya play into this? Well, the location that is today modern Libya in northern Africa is actually considered to be the location where Athenian culture first developed. Belus, in Assyrian mythology, which also bled into the Hellenistic world, is also associated with Bel Marduk, considered the patron god of Babylon, who founded the kingdom and also founded the megalithic ziggurat that was once known all across the realm. In this regard, mythical King Belus or Belus is also progenitor to the concept of the sacred twins of mythology, who are then tied directly to the founding of Phoenicia and the founding of written language. In all aspects, no matter which mythology or legend we're reading, Belus or Belus is considered to be a Semitic deity, also spelled or also known as Baal or Baal, B-A-A-L. So as far back as the earliest Greek history, we have the etymology of Mount Olympus being cloudy at best, but Mount Olympus was not the original name of this location. It was Mount Belus. That is fascinating, as we're told the Olympians, the Greek gods of Mount Olympus, derived their Olympian title from the name of the mountain on which they resided, the same mountain that was previously known as Mount Belus. In ancient Greek tradition, we're also told that the tribes who made up the Greek lands developed their initial bonds by meeting at the peaks of great geological features, and these geological features were often referred to by the Greeks as Mount Olympus, meaning that Mount Olympus was more of a concept than an actual place, with the true mountain we refer to today as Mount Olympus actually being known by the more revealing title of Mount Belus. Furthermore, adding fuel to the theory of mountains once being giants, the highest peak of Mount Olympus is known as mythical, or the nose, and it resembles just that. Now, here's where the history becomes really convoluted. According to Hellenistic legend, the newborn baby Zeus was sitting near Mount Olympus, or Mount Belus, in a bad mood. Heracles and his 4 brothers then orchestrated a race up the mountain to entertain Zeus. Zeus was so thrilled by the race that he blessed the winner with an olive wreath, which represented good fortune. From here on out, the athletic events at Mount Olympus were said to have taken place every 4 years. That is, according to legend. The accepted history is equally as frustrating. According to mainstream scholars, kings of the Mediterranean would, even before recorded history, often stage ceremonies with physical tests of human ability. The Minoans, according to ancient artwork found scattered across Greece, engaged in events like bull leaping and fighting, and gymnastics, which often accompanied a grand celebration. However, by the time of Homer's writings, around 750 BC, the Olympic Games are still not mentioned as a recurring event, and they're not mentioned by name. Homer does discuss multiple chariot races, boxing events, wrestling matches. However, the most popular and discussed of these competitions appears to be the javelin throwing. Do you know what a javelin is called in Northern African cultures, which just so happens to also be my namesake? A Djerid. And do you know where Hellenistic culture was said to have began in ancient times? A facet of the narrative which is completely and utterly tucked under the rug and avoided by mainstream academia today? Hellenistic culture was said to have begun at Lake Triton, also known as Chott el Djerid, in Tunisia. This exact location is also one of the greatest mysteries in all of history, as for hundreds upon hundreds of years, Chott el Djerid appears on ancient maps as a massive freshwater lake, being one of the most important lakes to Greek history. Here, at Lake Triton, as it was known, in Africa, the goddess and namesake of Athens, Athena, was said to have been born. Later European histories have translated the ancient text to imply that Athena was born from Zeus at Mount Olympus or Mount Belus and then transported by sea nymphs to Lake Triton, where she blossomed into queen of all the gods. Still, other fringe historians believe there is some truth to the myth, except in the opposite order. They propose that the Semitic teachings of ancient Babylon had been heavily influencing the northern African coastline, where the Egyptian goddess Neith was being worshipped as the goddess of Libya and possibly of all of Africa. Neith was considered to be the patron saint of the Berbers, and it's now believed that Neith was actually the basis for the creation of the goddess Athena and Athenian culture, which, using the transitive property, would imply that most, if not all, of ancient Greek or ancient Hellenistic culture was then influenced directly from northern Africa and the Egyptian and Semitic deities. The story of Jason and the Argonauts also places Lake Triton, the birthplace of Athena, as within the confines of Libya. Now, as history is full of myth and legend, I found it quite remarkable, because if we dive into the story of Jason and the Argonauts, by that time, Lake Triton, or Chott el Djerid, was already a mostly dried up, salty wasteland with very little fresh water, a report that directly contradicts the early myths of Lake Triton being a beautiful freshwater oasis. The narrative seems to imply that some sort of cataclysmic event greatly affected the landscape of northern Africa, so much so that it shifted Athena's homeland from a freshwater oasis into a rather dry saltwater basin. And guess what happens in the tale of the Argonauts? Chott el Djerid is so uninhabitable with almost no water that the Argonauts have to portage their ship, meaning to carry it over land to the next body of water. And what led me to conduct all of this research? The Diolkos. The Diolkos, also known as the portage machine, was some sort of massive mechanism for portaging ships across the Isthmus of Corinth, the narrow land bridge that divides Greece from the Peloponnese Peninsula. Measuring roughly 4 miles wide today, the portage machine was said to have covered this entire landscape and more, measuring up to 5 miles long. And this was an example of monumental architecture and antiquity, or ancient technology, as it was founded at least 2,600 years ago. Being built in 600 BC at the latest, the Diolkos was essentially a 5-mile stretch of land that was a fortified path. First, it had been completely leveled and made to be even throughout. Then this path was said to have been reinforced or fortified with massive stone blocks. Finally, some form of railway was installed on top to actually carry the ships across the stone path to the next body of water. If that sounds advanced for the time period, it was. We're told in a way the Diolkos was the first railway in recorded history, and it was also a feat of engineering that was considered to be the first of its kind. Truly, it appears many facets of this narrative have been painstakingly separated from one another, but below the surface is a mystery here that is as profound and monumental as the architecture itself. And history repeats itself over and over again. But is that coincidence or something more nefarious? We're told the massive, megalithic Diolkos operated without question at least through the year 67 AD, when we're told that Nero was said to have attempted to renovate the railway into a canal. Essentially, we're told the Diolkos was purposefully flooded, but this operation was said to have failed. It also brings into question the nature of time and of the monumental structures. As we're told, following Nero's failed flooding, the Diolkos isn't mentioned again by name, and yet in roughly the 800s AD, as well as around the year 1150 AD, we're told numerous massive warships were portaged across a reinforced path in Corinth. Many assume that this would have had to have been across the ancient Diolkos. Today, the Canal of Corinth is said to have been built essentially on the exact same location where this railway once existed. So again, everything so far in this narrative has tied together very nicely, so much so that the original architect of the Diolkos is considered to be a man by the name of Periander. He is the most controversial of the 7 sages of Greece. According to the mainstream, Periander was the second tyrant of Corinth and the second of the Cypselid dynasty, which began with his father, Cypselus. Periander ruled from roughly 627 BC until 585 BC, a very lengthy reign for this time period. The history of Periander illustrates the beginning of a merchant trade culture which flourished throughout Greece into the rest of the world, becoming the basis for the society that we are still part of today. Periander was said to have built the Diolkos in a way to aid his trade, and it served as a massive shortcut which was used by just about every merchant in the Greek lands. Periander enacted tolls on this railway, and while these tolls were said to be the only income for the kingdom of Corinth, the profit was so great that Corinth became the wealthiest kingdom in all the Greek lands.
The Corinthian style of architecture was said to have developed at this time alongside the Ionic and the Doric. However, the Corinthian style was a new style, one that had never really been seen before, as the Corinthian did not focus on symmetry. It did not focus on the divine feminine, but the Corinthian style of architecture was said to be the first masculine style of architecture, which when compared to the Ionic style, which was considered to be feminine, we have the male and the female coming together to also create the Doric style, which was said to be a higher level of architecture.
These forms of architecture, the ancient Greek styles, would go on to form the basis of all the greatest architectural forms of antiquity, all seemingly rooted in this history that's tied to the unbelievable megalithic railway across the kingdom of Corinth. What's also notable here is that, following his passing, Periander was quickly labeled as a tyrant, and most of the histories associated with his achievements were convoluted. For example, Periander remained to the elite of Greece as one of the greatest minds in Greek history, who quite literally built monuments and structures which would not be matched for hundreds of years. To them, Periander was one of the 7 sages of Greece, the literal lifeblood of the Greek society. Yet to the merchants and the Romans who eventually inherited this history and inherited these structures, most of the true nature of what occurred was erased, and the architecture was literally destroyed, purposefully flooded, and Periander was described as one of the most despicable tyrants who ever lived. Yet even the Roman philosophers recognized Periander's wit and ability, or at least they attributed many of these creations to him. as Periander is also said to be the source to many famous quotes, adages, and anecdotes, as well as the monumental architecture. Some of these sayings include, "Tyrants who intend to be safe should make loyal their bodyguards, not their arms," and "Pleasures are transient, honor is immortal," as well as, "Be moderate in prosperity, prudent in adversity," which goes along with his other quote, "Be the same to your friends in adversity and prosperity." However, the most famous of the quotes attributed to Periander are, "Whatever agreement you make, stick to it." Essentially, Periander is one of the first leaders who stuck to his word or found honor in being honest. The other famous quote being associated with Periander is, "Correct not only the offenders, but also those who are on the brink of offending." Essentially, Periander was one of the first leaders who believed in proactively addressing issues before they occurred, and for this, he is revered by many scholars of ancient times, but was hated by many of those who he directly influenced. And still, at the core of all this current narrative jargon, we have one thing that becomes very, very interesting. Hellenistic or Greek culture appears to have arose in Chott el Djerid in Tunisia, which was once a flourishing oasis, but at some point went nearly completely dry and was filled in with salt, seemingly implying a flood of some kind. Here, legend states Athena was raised to live by these northern African customs, possibly Egyptian customs, which manifested into what would become the basis for the Hellenistic culture. The Olympic Games, named after Olympus, the mountain. However, the original name of the mountain was actually Mount Belus or Mount Belus. Bel or Baal or Baal being the Babylonian god that's also associated with the founding of megalithic structures like the Great Ziggurat. Belus also has ties to the Phoenician origins, which in itself we can relate to both the sea peoples or the seafaring merchants, as well to the Olympic Games held as an event for entertaining Zeus, but truly the games appear to have their origins in festivities and celebrations associated with sacrifice, death, and rebirth. Ancient Semitic Babylonian teachings, reborn as Hellenistic Greek ones, the Greek culture, the divine twins, being the leaders that formed this sort of new culture. We have metaphors here, with one being Greece and the other seemingly being an unknown force that was behind the architecture, behind the monumental nature of all things that were being created, that were being associated with the gods. One of the most mysterious and most important in Greece being the Diolkos, which made crossing Greece possible by ship, but it also awarded Corinth, the Corinthian Greek kingdom, with the most money of nearly any kingdom in the world at that time. This, in return, we are told, led to a flurry of megalithic Hellenistic architecture being founded throughout the world, which then adopted one of three new Greek styles, sometimes utilizing all three, with the Corinthian being the basis for the masculine or the base layer of all buildings. Another metaphor for just how deeply this history appears to go. All of it tying back to some sort of oasis that existed in northern Africa that was destroyed by some form of cataclysm.